Well, thanks for having us again. I'll be somewhat quick, and then Carol will go into a lot of the meat of what we were doing and the relevancy to a lot of you, to everybody in the audience. But first, we want to just kind of showcase the entire Region 4. So you guys, if you aren't aware, part of this bigger region covered by FTA. Highlighting the 6 agencies that we worked with: NARCOG, NACOG, Baldwin, Southeast Alabama, or Wiregrass, East Alabama, and Lee Russell were the 6 that we worked with. When we started talking with ALDOT and Gary and his team, we quickly realized that we had to organize 6 different agencies and work in partnership with ALDOT, FTA Region 4. So there was a lot of moving parts, and so at least for us to get organized, we really had to first see what was an actual timeline to get this accomplished. Well, we first started, if any of the grantees are in this room, we first started by looking at ALDOT or the FTA website and talking with them, and they said, we can get that done in 6 months. Well, that didn't happen, but so we did start about this time last year, April, and we're hoping to get done in September. However, we didn't do the training on site until December. So just imagine kind of the flexibility that we had to have with this type of project. So, but this timeline was on FTA's website. So the lesson here, be flexible. FTA does take a lot of time to check all those boxes and make sure everything's there. A lot of the stuff that needed to be submitted were lengthy plans and lengthy documents that needed signatures and all sorts of different compliance factors within that. So it did take a lot of time for them to review all 6 applications. More on the organization that we worked with. I don't expect you all to read that, but we wanted to have a visualization for each of the grantees to physically walk through this checklist, and each of those items was what was required for submission to FTA. So they had this checklist to walk through and have some sort of visualization of what they were required to submit. In order for it to keep moving, we wanted to have a monthly check-in with the entire group. And in between there, we would check in with ALDOT as well to make sure that we're on track, what's going on, what they're hearing, what we're hearing. And then once a month, we would meet with all of the grantees. And that was just an opportunity to see how things were going. Once we got to some of those milestones that were here in that timeline, if the meeting was kind of around that time frame, we would say, did you get submission? Did you get a feedback from FTA? It was just an opportunity for us to keep that going. And that was just, in terms of an entire project or an entire process, you have to rely on some sort of timeline or checklist to make sure that you have everything that you need to keep it going. I mentioned working with FTA Region 4 office, and that was our first priority, actually, was to establish contact there. We worked with Rhonda King and her staff there, and they were amazing to work with. They were responsive, they knew exactly what was happening, because that's what we wanted to do, was to say, this is what we're doing, this is our timeline, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And I would anticipate a lot of you should have that sort of relationship or open conversation when you're trying to accomplish something like this. So having that relationship allowed us to email them. I even had Rhonda's personal cell phone, so it was just a way for us to communicate, especially when we were on site working with each of the grantees in December. If we met a glitch, I could just call Rhonda and it would be right there and they would help us. So that was very essential. Of course, the on-site training that we did was through TRAMS in the ECHO system. Each transit agency that we worked with got a copy of each of those handbooks. That way they could always have something to fall back on and learn. But the face-to-face was probably the big piece to take away. And we'll talk, I think Carol will talk a little bit about that, but that was probably the big culmination of pulling it all together, because up until that point, everyone was submitting their documents, getting ready to go. FTA allowed us to do that and do that process with them. So that was the ultimate goal, was to get each of those 6 established and into TRAMS and program their first amount of monies they had. Talked about timeline just a little bit and the importance of being flexible, but we did have a timeline of starting in March and then going, we ultimately sort of quote unquote finished in December. But each of the grantees, they do have almost this entire time now. Their first drawdown or spending will start in October. So there's still a lot of time for learning and opportunity to continue to ask questions and learn from this.
So that was just kind of a brief overview. We know you're running late, so we're kind of rushing through this just a little bit so that you don't have to hang out here any longer than necessary before you get to go to lunch. But what we wanted to do was just tell you a little bit about what each of those agencies had to go through. And if you look at those long checklists, it's one thing to see a list like that. It's another thing to know how long it takes for people to go through and do each of those separate steps. This was quite an undertaking for all of those agencies. And the timeline, we built into the timeline almost double the amount of time that FTA said it would need to review, and double was not anywhere close to enough. So we thought by adding in extra time, we would still be done by September, and we were lucky to finish in December. And if it hadn't been for LDOT pushing FTA a lot to say, hey, we're at the end here, you need to work with us on this, we would not have been able to complete everything we did in December. There are lots of steps when you go to transition, and among those steps are making sure that along the way FTA reviews different documents, and depending on who reviews it, they decide if you meet the criteria or you don't meet the criteria. And someone can decide, yes, this is good enough, or no, I need some more information. And when they send it back, they don't necessarily tell you all the different things that they need from you to make it right. And so there have been some struggles in terms of trying to decide exactly what is needed and how to pursue that. But the agencies who've been involved have worked really diligently on this, and they've had the support of ALDOT all along the way, and hopefully the support from us has helped so that they could figure out where they need to be. I always tell them that a year from now, when they start in October and they're on their own, a year from now, they won't ever regret having made this decision. They're going to have a lot more flexibility. They're going to be able to have a lot more autonomy and make their own decisions when they are their own independent agency. But it's a large struggle. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it isn't an easy thing to go from doing things one way to a completely different way. But a year from now, I don't think any of them would change and go back to having things the way it was. So we learned that timelines aren't always what you anticipate they're going to be. We also learned the importance of those checklists, because you could check off each step of the way, each thing that you accomplished. That's something that's important for all of us to remember, that if you have a lot of things that you have to try to accomplish and you're going into something new, it's really important that you give yourself the opportunity to look at all the things that you need to accomplish and make sure that they're laid out so that you know when you've actually accomplished the things you set out to do. And it was really important in this process. We found out that the importance of having one-on-one assistance when it came time to go into trams. We sat down right next to the person who was putting it into trams, and we sat side by side to get all of that information entered into the system, so that as they encountered things, they were the one putting it in, so that when they went back to see it again, they would recognize where they had been, but that they had someone sitting right next to them who had done it before and who could help them, guide them through each of those steps. And as Jeremy said, things don't always go so smooth. They'd get to something and it wouldn't let them proceed, and it would be because someone who was supposed to review something hadn't cleared it on their end. And so we'd have to call and make sure that, okay, they had read it, but they hadn't necessarily checked the right box, meaning on the Fta end. So the value of one-on-one assistance was important. The other thing that was really important is that we had ALDOT support throughout the entire thing. There wasn't a single monthly meeting that Brad wasn't in on, Randy wasn't in on, Gary wasn't in on, Mike, the whole group sitting in every single month to make sure that this was progressing just the way it needed to do. It isn't very often you have that kind of commitment from your upper management. And all of these people wanted to make sure that this process was moving along and that everyone had everything they needed at every level to make sure it was going to be successful. It was also important that we keep FTA in the loop, because FTA is ultimately the one who's going to make the call of whether or not these people get to be independent. And so making them aware of where we were in the process and building that relationship was key. And so Jeremy being the single contact person with Region 4 was really critical, so that they were kept in the loop and felt like they were part of the process as well. So now I'd like to ask the grantees two questions. The people who are here in this room who were grantees for the process. What was your biggest challenge? And what was the best outcome so far from having done this? You know, it's hard to see that end of the road yet, but what was the best outcome up to this point? And what was your biggest challenge? So would someone from North Central Alabama, is there someone here in the room? Okay, is there someone here from Northwest Alabama COG? Okay, so what would you say is your biggest challenge so far? Okay, the wait. You know, you expect that when you put the stuff in, you're going to hear, yes, okay, this is all done, you're checked off all the boxes, you're ready to go. But it doesn't come in that way. It comes in little pieces. And then you get this piece, but you don't have this piece yet. Or there isn't that overall sense of now you're done and everything's ready to go. And so the biggest challenge is the wait. What would you say the biggest, the best thing has been so far? Okay, so being able to just get the thing done and have it over with. So good. Brats.
I agree with Jesse on just lack of response back from FDA. We're still waiting.
I know, it is. It's really tough, and we're hoping. We've been talking with ALDOT now to see if there's any way that we, you know, our contract is done with that part, but to see if there's any way that we can help intercede in some of that, to just say, here's where they think they're at. Where are you thinking that they are at? They feel like they have lots of time, right? Because they know that you don't actually become independent until October 1st. So there's no reason for them to kind of rush and get this done. But for those of you who are waiting, that's a long period of time to wait from December until the end of September of the following year to figure out what's happening. And so hopefully we can help move that process forward. What do you think the best thing is that has come out of it so far?
Well, I think for me, because I was relatively new to transit, it was just going through all the plans and policies that they require and really reviewing those and updating those and understanding.
Okay, I promise I didn't coach her, but that's exactly what I needed someone to say, because that's the message to all of you. And as we talk about what's coming up next, the message is how important it is to get all of those things together, because now you have them. And you have them for anything else that comes up moving forward, so thank you for that. Getting all of those plan things together. Is there anyone here from Wiregrass? Great. I know you weren't part of this process because you're brand new. Is there anything that you can address on either of those?
Although I wasn't part of the process, I think that I can anticipate some issues based on the fact that we operate 54/7 through 11. So I'm going to have regular preferences 54/7 of my assets to 11. So I'm still going to be dealing with some issues with the state. So we got to figure out how that's going to come.
Okay. As a joint recipient of 5311 and 5307 funds, Wiregrass will still be under the state for its 5311. It will be independent for its 5307. So, and then a new director coming in. The one thing that might be a benefit of all of that is all of these documents are now in a row, so that you will have access to all of these different documents and where they are, and so that should you need them for something else, or as you move forward in this process, you'll know where things are at for producing them and figuring out what's going to be happening along with the rest of the 6 agencies with FTA. East Alabama? Yeah.
I probably said that I'm just going to address the challenges that as far as the outcomes, but just changing up the methods and procedures with doing how you do DVs, how you do procurement, how you get deals, those are the things. So it's going to be challenges for us, just a new way of doing it.
Okay. So as part of this, and I'll be showing that to you next, there are different plans that you have to lay out and give them to FTA. And then FTA has to make sure that that's the kind of plan they want you to have. And so it may or may not be what you had been doing previous to this point. And so having those and get used to not only turning in that plan, but then operating under those plans. Did I get that right for you? Okay. Okay. Sounds good. And Lee Russell? There you are. Hi.
Yeah, I fall in the same category of Wiregrass. The whole process made me realize how much outside help was doing that 50 years and run that. So, but I am looking forward to taking charge of doing our stuff.
A year from now, you will, but I think that's really a good point. That I think that as an agency, whether you're a 5311 or you're a 5307, so much of the background stuff that happens all the time with contracts, with all the interactions with FTA, you haven't had to deal with. You know, how many of you have had direct contact with Region 4 ever? With anything to do with your contracts, any of your operations? Okay, all of that happens with ALDOT, and so they've always taken on that responsibility for you. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that lets you, yeah, exactly. That lets you know what ALDOT's been doing. And ALDOT has never gotten any reimbursement, ever, for what they've been doing for the 5307s. Okay? And that's why there needed to be some changes for this as well. Well, like I said, I know that there's a whole lot of you in this room that don't ever intend to be a 5307. And you don't really care what they all had to go through because it doesn't have anything to do with you. So just in a couple of slides, I want to talk to you about what are the lessons that you can learn from all of this. And probably the biggest lesson of all is the fact that there is a big amount of emphasis that should be placed in each of your hands when it comes to maintaining your documentation at your agency. Each of these 5307 agencies had to come up with a lot of documentation and put it together. Okay, now they have all of that. All of you, when I go through the list of things that are here, these are things that every one of your agencies should have as well. It doesn't matter if you're a 5311 or you're a 5307. This is something that every agency in this room should have and know where it is and be able to access it. And I'm willing to bet that most of you don't have hardly any of these. And so this is an opportunity for you to learn from their experience and say, oh, maybe I should start putting some of these documents together and see if we can't get our act together and have all of these documents ready. And then I'll show you why that's important. These documents include an active SAM registration. SAM is the way the government tracks if you are an agency that can get federal dollars. Every one of you receives federal dollars, so you should all be registered in SAM. How many of you know if you're registered in SAM? Okay, I don't see a whole lot of hands, or else you got to raise them really high. So you should have your SAM documentation printed out and in a file in your office or on a file on your computer where you can get to it right away. We are asked all the time to produce our SAM registration. Why? Because we apply for all kinds of grants, okay? Or we help others apply, and they need to have their SAM registration. So find your SAM registration and have it available to you. Yeah.
My question is, are you considered under the county commissioner's SAM? Because we have SAM, that Macon County Commission.
Yes, if you are organized under your county commission, that would be your SAM. Okay, you need to have your current year operating budget and your current year capital budget. All of you have that. But do you have it separated out so that you could pull it aside right away and have it available to you? 2 years of single audits. All of you should have your audits handy and available to you, and so in a folder and a file so that you can get to them and be able to produce those audits. An organizational chart. Something as easy as your organizational chart, a lot of people don't ever have printed. And you might be under 2 organizational charts. You might be part of a bigger parent organizational chart like your Council of Governments, but you should have an organizational chart for your transit agency as well. And then your Title VI plan. Every one of you, the 5311s included, have to sign assurances that you give to LDOT every year. And one of those assurances is that you will adhere to the Title VI regulations. To do that, you have to have a Title VI plan. Okay? So you all, as an agency, should have a Title VI plan. I'm not going to embarrass you and have you raise your hand to say how many of you have that handy, but most of the time, a lot of agencies are signing the paperwork and not necessarily having a plan, so to speak, at their disposal. You need to have an equal employment opportunity plan. Again, this is one of the assurances is a 5311 that you sign and you send it to LDOT every year. You have to do that in order to get your federal funds. But do you have that plan? Same with a disadvantaged business enterprise. These are all things that are parts of your certs and assurances. Do you have a cost allocation plan? Many of you are part of a county government, and so you're just a division. Okay, so your costs are allocated, okay? And you need to figure out how those costs are being allocated so that you know how you are determining your budget. Okay? We have a whole financial management class that teaches just cost allocation. Okay, but if you don't know how to do cost allocation for your agency, that's something all of you should be learning to do. And then for policies and procedures, these are the policies and procedures each of the 5307s had to be able to give to FDA. These aren't all the policies and procedures you need. You know that you have lots more that govern your agency, but these are the ones they had to produce. What is your procurement policy and procedure? Now, you tend to depend on LDOT to help you with your procurements, but you should know how that procurement process works. How do you manage your grant financial management? Okay, how are you assuring that your grants are being managed the way that they are intended to be managed? Again, your budget, How do you handle your accounts payable? In other words, how is that process handled? What are your payroll processes? What do you do at the end of each period? So at the end of each quarter, when you are submitting, or if you're on a monthly basis, when you're submitting to ALDOT for your payments, what are the processes that are in place for that? What do you do about preventive maintenance? How is that performed at your agency? What do you do for project management? Who's in charge of what at your agency? What are your indirect rates? All of you have an indirect rate, and it's based on whoever your cognizant agency is, and the cognizant agency is whoever you receive the most amount of funds from. Some of you, that's the Federal Transit Administration, but from some of you, depending on your organization through your Council of Governments or your Metropolitan Planning Agency or however you are organized, it may be another organization that really is your cognizant agency where the COG gets most of its funds from. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry?
If you're less than 50 employees, you do not have to have a plan.
Correct. If you, on the EEO, if you have less than 50 employees, you don't have to have a plan, but all of you still have to submit those assurances. So you need to know what EEO is and how it applies.
I believe that's the same one.
I believe it is on the DBE, but you should be submitting a DBE on your assurances to ALDOT. Accounting for your fuel utilization, accounting and financial operations and how they work, and your fixed assets, and a list of all of your fixed assets. And you have to do that for NTD anyway, but you've been lucky because NTD has been handled a lot by ALDOT up to this point, but you need to know how maybe in Alabama, have they started doing their own NTD for the rurals? Okay, so you're transitioning into that, so you need to be able to understand all the parts of your fixed assets as well. So why do you have to do that? The advantages to doing it is that you're ready for other federal grant opportunities as they come forward. There's a lot of federal money out there right now. There are other things that may be changing. You know, we all of a sudden had all this CARES money. Okay, it didn't require a whole lot of accountability, but other programs that come along might. Randy talked to you yesterday about the fact that there might get to be some state money. We're hoping down the road that there'll get to be some state money for Alabama to be able to match those federal funds. There might be some requirements that come along with those state monies. You don't know that yet. In many states, there are requirements that you have to have paperwork to go along with it. It could be that there are other opportunities for within counties coming up because there are a number of counties within your state that do not have transportation. So having this paperwork gets you prepared for all of that. It gets you ready for any other grant opportunities that might come forward. And that's not just for getting more money, because a lot of you have plenty of money right now. But when the CARES money runs out, and when there are other things, or maybe you want to try something new, it's really nice to be ready for those opportunities. It allows you to better educate your governing board or your board of directors. I think sometimes we don't do a very good job of letting them know exactly what it is we do and how we do it. Okay? And they're making decisions without all of that information. And these things that we've talked about now are all really important things. It helps you do better strategic planning. I think lots of times what you end up doing is finishing up one year and then just starting the next year all over again. But really, it helps you look out 3 to 5 years. It helps you plan for your future. Where do we want to be? What do we want to do? You've had some turnover in Alabama in the last year or two. It's likely in the next year or two you're going to have more turnover. This kind of stuff helps you with succession planning so that when someone comes in as a new director, they have this stuff at their fingertips, that they know where to start. It's not very much fun to come into an agency and have to start from scratch and not know where anything is. And it helps you for expansion opportunities. it would be really nice to be able to come and say that in the state of Alabama, we have 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, and holidays for every county in the state. We're a long way from being able to do that. And Alabama's not the only state that's in that position. But until we're there, there's always room for making a difference and doing more. So that's why what these 5307s did matters to all of you. Because this is your opportunity to really get organized and have that stuff at your fingertips so that you know what you have and that you're better prepared and organized within your system. So that's the call to action for all of you today, is to go home, and if you can't do all of it, just get a start. Okay? Take that list. All of this will be available on the website. Take the list and just tap it off one at a time. Congratulations to the 5307s. It was a real pleasure working with all of you. Thank you to ALDOT for giving us the opportunity to do that. I think you're going to be really, really successful moving forward. And for the rest of you, I look forward to watching you continue to grow and change, and this is a good way to start. So thank you.